The silent witness of the Crimson Night, a mystery no one wanted to tell. The town of Ravencourt had always been a quiet place, tucked between the hills and the river that ran crimson under the dying light of dusk. The locals often said the color came from the clay at the riverbed, but that night, it looked darker, deeper, almost as if something had bled into it. Detective Eleanor Graves arrived just as the storm broke. Her coat flapped against the wind, the rain drawing silver lines down her face as she stepped under the flickering street lamp. The house before her, number 19 Hollow Lane, was surrounded by silence, the kind of silence that feels alive, waiting, listening. A police officer ran toward her, his boots splashing through puddles. "Detective Graves," he said, voice trembling. "You'd better see this for yourself." She followed him inside. The living room smelled faintly of iron and wet roses. The lights were on, though dim and trembling. In the center of the floor lay Henry Mallory, a local historian, known for his strange fascination with Ravencourt's past. His body was cold, his hand clutching something small and metallic, a key, smeared with blood. "Any signs of forced entry?" Eleanor asked, her sharp eyes scanning the room. "None," replied the officer. "Doors were locked from the inside. Windows, too. We had to break one to get in." Eleanor knelt by the body. There were no signs of struggle, no weapon in sight, no footprints except their own. Yet the man's expression was one of terror, his eyes wide open, staring at the empty fireplace. "What was he doing before this?" she asked quietly. The officer handed her a small notebook found on the table. The pages were filled with rough handwriting, notes about the town's oldest legend, the Crimson Night, a story passed down for generations but never written down. According to it, once every century, the river ran red, and a witness would appear, someone who saw something no one was meant to see. That witness, the story claimed, never lived to tell it. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. "Did anyone else see him tonight?" "Yes," said the officer, hesitating. "The maid. She found the door locked, lights on, and heard music playing inside. She said Mr. Mallory was alone. She called us when he didn't answer." The detective nodded. "Where is she now?" "In the kitchen." Shaken. Eleanor stood up and moved toward the kitchen. The house creaked with every step. She could feel the tension hanging in the air, the kind that told her there was more to this place than met the eye. The maid, a pale young woman named Clara, sat at the table with trembling hands around a cup of tea she hadn't touched. "Clara," Eleanor said softly, taking a seat across from her. "You worked for Mr. Mallory a long time?" 3 years, Clara whispered. "He was kind, quiet, but these last few weeks he changed. He kept saying he was close to finding the truth. I didn't know what he meant. The truth about what?" "I think about what really happened the last time the river turned red," she said, her voice barely audible. "He said the town was hiding something, that there was a name no one dared to speak." Eleanor's gaze drifted to the window. The storm had grown heavier, and lightning flashed, illuminating the street outside. For a moment, she thought she saw a shadow move across the lawn, tall, silent, watching. But when she blinked, it was gone. She turned back to Clara. "Did he have any visitors recently?" Clara hesitated. "Just one. A man. Came 2 nights ago. I didn't see his face clearly, but he wore a black coat and gloves. They argued. Mr. Mallory told him, 'It's too late now. The truth belongs to everyone.'" Eleanor wrote that down. "Did you hear the man's voice?"
"Low. Calm.
But angry." The detective stood. "All right. I'll need you to stay in town for questioning." As she walked back into the hall, her eyes caught something, a painting hanging above the staircase. It was a landscape of Ravencourt, but not as it looked now. The town was smaller, darker, and in the corner of the painting, the river gleamed red under a full moon. She looked closer. There was a faint signature at the bottom. Not Henry Mallory. It read, "Witness, 1925. Eleanor frowned. "Witness," she murmured. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, and from somewhere upstairs came a soft creak, as if someone was moving. Her hand went to her gun. "Stay here," she told the officer, then started up the stairs. Each step groaned under her weight. The hallway above was dark, the air colder than below. The first door she opened led to a study. Books lined the walls, papers scattered across the desk. The rain drummed hard against the window pane. She flicked the light switch. The bulb hummed, then came alive, revealing something that froze her for a moment. Across the mirror above the fireplace, someone had scrawled words in what looked like dried blood. "The witness is still here." Eleanor's reflection looked back at her, the crimson words hanging above like a warning. And then she heard it, footsteps behind her. She turned sharply. The hallway was empty. Only the sound of the rain and wind filled the house. But as she stepped back toward the door, her eyes caught movement again, in the mirror. A shadow. Right behind her. She spun around, gun raised. Nothing. Only silence. But the mirror, still trembling slightly, now showed something new. Behind her reflection, the figure of a man stood in the corner, his face blurred, his hands folded as if in prayer. When she turned again, the corner was empty. And yet, on the floor where he had been, she saw muddy footprints, fresh, leading toward the locked window. Outside, the river gleamed redder than before. Eleanor whispered to herself, "The silent witness." The storm roared louder, drowning her voice. Somewhere in the distance, the church bell struck midnight, and the town of Ravencourt slept uneasily, unaware that the past had just opened its eyes again. The morning after Henry Mallory's death, Ravencourt awoke to a strange quiet. The rain had stopped, but the streets still glistened under the pale sun, and whispers moved faster than the wind. Some said Henry had gone mad. Others swore he had seen something the night before, a shadow on the bridge, or a face in the river. Detective Eleanor Graves stood by the riverbank, staring at the crimson water that ran sluggishly through the mist. The coroner's report had confirmed her suspicions. Henry Mallory hadn't been poisoned or shot. His heart had simply stopped, as though he'd been frightened to death. But there was no clear reason why. The metallic key found in his hand had no matching lock in his house. It was small, old-fashioned, carved with strange initials. Evie. Eleanor had asked the town records officer, but no one seemed to know what or who Evie referred to. She turned as Officer Bennett approached, his notebook in hand. "Detective, we've finished checking Mallory's study," he said. "There's something you should see." Back inside the house, sunlight filtered weakly through the dusty curtains. The study looked as though a storm had passed through it. Papers scattered, books torn from the shelves, and a faint scent of burnt wax in the air. Bennett pointed to a section of the wooden floor. "We found this under the rug." Eleanor crouched and lifted the edge of the carpet. Beneath it, carved roughly into the wood, were words written in uneven letters. The crimson night never ended. Her pulse quickened. "Get this photographed," she ordered. Then she noticed something else. Beneath the carved words was a faint circular marking, as if something heavy had once been placed there. "Was there anything found on top of this?" she asked. Bennett shook his head. "Nothing but dust." Eleanor straightened. "What about the neighbors?" "Mostly asleep that night. But one old man said he saw a light in Mallory's attic window around midnight. Thought it was lightning until he realized there was no thunder." "An attic," Eleanor repeated. Clara didn't mention that. She climbed the narrow stairs that led to the top floor. The air grew colder the higher she went. The attic door was locked, but the keyhole was old and rusted. The metal key from Henry's hand fit perfectly. The lock clicked open. Inside was darkness, thick and heavy. Eleanor switched on her flashlight, and the beam cut through the gloom, revealing dust-covered trunks, broken furniture, and stacks of rolled-up parchment. In the center of the room stood an easel, draped in a white sheet. She pulled it off and gasped. It was another painting of Ravencourt. But this time, the scene showed the town square, crowded with people in 1925. They were watching something or someone on a wooden platform. In the distance, the river shone red beneath the moon. At the bottom of the painting, the same strange signature appeared. Witness. But beneath it, faintly scratched into the paint, were the initials EV. She whispered, "E, the same as the key." Her flashlight caught something behind the painting, a small wooden chest, locked. She tried the key again. It turned smoothly. Inside lay old photographs, yellowed letters, and a journal bound in dark leather. The cover read, "Property of Elias Venn." Eleanor sat down on the floor and began to read. March 14th, 1925. The river runs red again. The mayor says it is the clay, but I know the truth. They buried it, the secret, under the church, where no light can reach. They think silence will keep it dead. But silence only listens. It remembers. Asterisk. Tomorrow, they'll gather at the square. I will speak. I will tell them what happened the night the witness was chosen. Asterisk. The next page was ripped out. Eleanor flipped through the rest of the journal, but most of the entries had been torn or smeared by water. Only one line at the end was still legible. If I die, the witness will find another voice. The crimson night never ends, it waits. A shiver ran through her. The handwriting was desperate, almost trembling. Elias Venn must have been the man in the painting, the artist, perhaps even the one who signed witness. But what had he witnessed? A sudden creak broke the silence. Eleanor froze. Someone was on the stairs. "Bennett," she called. No answer. She turned off the flashlight and stood in the dark, listening. The steps were slow, deliberate. Then they stopped right outside the door. Eleanor reached for her gun. "Who's there?" The handle turned slightly, but the door didn't open. Only a low whisper slipped through the crack, barely audible, but enough to make her blood run cold. "You shouldn't have come here, detective." The voice was deep, unfamiliar, and filled with calm menace. Eleanor lunged forward and yanked the door open, but the hallway was empty. Only dust motes danced in the thin sunlight. Downstairs, Bennett's voice called up. "Detective, someone's been in the backyard." She hurried down, clutching the journal. Outside, the muddy ground bore clear footprints, large, heavy boots, leading to the back gate. The gate itself hung half open, the latch broken. "Whoever it was," Bennett said, panting, "they were watching the house. Maybe looking for something you found." Eleanor looked down at the journal. "They already knew it was here," she murmured. "And they didn't want me to find it." She turned back to the house, her eyes falling once more on the river. The crimson hue glimmered like a warning in the daylight. That evening, she stopped by the Ravencourt Historical Archives. The old caretaker, Mrs. Whitlock, greeted her with a nervous smile. "Detective Graves, you're here about Mr. Mallory, aren't you?"
Yes.
"I'm looking for any record of an Elias Venn. Around 1925. Mrs. Whitlock hesitated, then motioned for her to follow. They entered a room filled with old ledgers and photographs. She pulled out a thick book labeled Town Register, 1900 to 1930. "There was an Elias Venn," the old woman said. "Painter, schoolteacher. He disappeared the night of the Crimson Festival in 1925. Festival. Yes, a celebration the town held every 100 years to mark the Crimson Night. A superstition, really. But something went wrong that year. The river turned red earlier than expected. People said it was a sign." "What happened to Elias?" Mrs. Whitlock's hands trembled slightly as she turned the page. "He spoke out against the mayor. Said the town was hiding a crime. The next morning he was gone. They said he drowned himself in the river." Eleanor frowned. "Was there ever a body?" "No," the woman whispered. "And no one ever mentioned him again. The town doesn't like to talk about that year." Eleanor closed the book slowly. "But Mallory did." "Yes," said Mrs. Whitlock. "He came here often, asking questions about the same thing. He said he'd found a painting, one that showed something the others didn't." "What's something?" The old woman's eyes filled with fear. "The witness. The one who saw what happened by the river that night. He said if you looked closely enough, the painting showed their face. But no one who looked ever wanted to remember it." Eleanor felt her heart pound. "Where's that painting now?" Mrs. Whitlock shook her head. "Mallory took it home." Eleanor exhaled. "Then it's still in his house." But as she turned to leave, the old woman called after her softly, Detective Graves, be careful. Some secrets in Ravencourt aren't just old, they're alive. That night, Eleanor returned to the house at Hollow Lane. She walked into the study again, the shadows long and uneasy. Her flashlight moved across the walls, stopping on the first painting, the one signed Witness. She looked closer, tracing her fingers over the faces in the crowd. Then, in the corner near the river, she saw it, a small, almost hidden figure standing apart from everyone else. A face she recognized. Henry Mallory's. The same pale eyes. The same lined expression. But the painting was nearly 100 years old. Her breath caught. That's impossible. The storm outside began again, wind rattling the windows. She turned toward the stairs and froze. The mirror on the landing, the same one marked the night before, now bore a fresh line written across it, still wet and red. The witness has returned. The next morning, a heavy fog lay over Ravencourt like a blanket of ghosts. The church bell rang faintly through the mist, its sound dull and tired. Detective Eleanor Graves had barely slept. The image of Henry Mallory's face, painted into a century-old canvas, refused to leave her mind. She drove through the winding streets, her thoughts circling the same questions. How could Mallory appear in a painting from 1925? And what did "the witness has returned" mean? At the police station, Officer Bennett waited with a stack of reports. "Detective, we ran the name Elias Venn through every archive in the county," he said. "No birth records, no death certificate. It's like he was erased." Eleanor frowned. Erased or hidden? "There's more," Bennett continued. "The handwriting in Mallory's notebook? Forensic comparison shows it matches some of the writing found in Venn's journal. That means Mallory must have been copying his notes, maybe even continuing his research." Eleanor leaned forward. So Mallory was trying to finish what Elias started. "Seems like it." Bennett hesitated, then added, "Also, we checked Mallory's bank records. 2 weeks ago, he received a large transfer, £5,000, from an untraceable account. The memo line just said 'for silence.'" Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Someone paid him to stop talking. Exactly. She tapped her fingers on the table. But he didn't stop.
No.
And it got him killed. Later that day, Eleanor went to see Mayor Jonathan Pierce, a man in his late 50s with a polished smile and calculating eyes. His office was decorated with photographs of Ravencourt's festivals, paintings of the river, and an antique clock that ticked too loudly. "Detective Graves," he greeted smoothly. "Terrible business about Mr. Mallory. I hope you're close to solving it." "I'm closer than some people might like," Eleanor said evenly. The mayor smiled thinly. "I see. And what is it you're implying?" "That Mr. Mallory was silenced for discovering something the town didn't want found. Something about 1925. His expression tightened. "Old stories, detective. That's all they are. My grandfather used to talk about that festival. Nothing more than superstition and rumor." Eleanor placed the photograph of the painting on his desk. The crowd, the crimson river, and the man standing apart. "You were saying?" she asked. The mayor studied it for a long moment, then pushed it back toward her. "You shouldn't bring this up again. People here don't take kindly to digging up the past." "Is that a warning, Mayor Pierce?" "A suggestion," he said coldly. "Ravencourt values peace." Eleanor stood, her patience thinning. Peace built on silence isn't peace. It's denial. Before he could reply, she left, her footsteps echoing in the polished hall. That evening, Eleanor returned to the riverbank. She stood near the old bridge where the water flowed slow and thick, tinted a dull red even under the moonlight. A man in a tattered coat was sitting nearby, tossing stones into the current. "Evenin', detective," he said without turning. His voice was rough, weathered by years and drink. "Name's Thomas Reed. Used to work for the Mallorys when I was young." Eleanor approached cautiously. "You knew Henry?" "Knew his grandfather, too," the man muttered. "Old family. They always said the Mallorys were cursed. Every generation, one of them gets pulled back to the river." "Pulled back?" He nodded, eyes glinting. "Can't fight it. The Crimson Night calls them. just like it called Elias Venn. You knew Venn? Thomas chuckled bitterly. Knew of him. He painted the truth. And for that, they made him disappear. Who's theys? The man's gaze lifted to the church tower across the river. Ask the ones who still ring the bell, detective. They've been guarding that secret for 100 years. Eleanor turned to look, but when she looked back, Thomas Reed was gone. Only his hat remained, drifting in the water like a ghost. Back at her small rented room near the station, Eleanor spread her notes across the desk. Elias Venn disappeared in 1925. Henry Mallory found his journal. Both spoke of the witness. Both died mysteriously. She glanced again at the painting photograph. Her eyes narrowed. In the corner, beyond the crowd, the faint outline of the church could be seen, its doors open, a shadowy figure standing inside. She grabbed her coat. Time to visit the church, she murmured. The Ravencourt Church of St. Helena stood on the hill, its stone walls streaked with moss. Inside, the air smelled of candle wax and something faintly metallic. Father Adrian Crow, an elderly priest with pale eyes, greeted her with a cautious smile. Detective Graves. How can I help you? I'm investigating Henry Mallory's death, she said. He was researching something called the Crimson Night. I believe the church might have some connection. The priest's expression darkened. You shouldn't trouble yourself with that tale. It brings only grief. Tell me anyway. Father Crow sighed and walked to a pew, sitting slowly. A century ago, when the river first ran red, the townsfolk thought it was a blessing, a sign of prosperity. But Elias Venn claimed it was something else. He said it was the mark of sin, that the river carried the blood of a man wrongfully killed. Killed by whom? Crow hesitated. The townspeople, or rather, those who led them. They accused a farmer of desecrating the holy ground, false charges. They buried him under the church to hide the crime. Elias tried to expose it, but the town turned against him. And then, he disappeared, Eleanor finished quietly. The priest nodded. And since that night, the river remembers. Every few generations, someone tries to tell the truth, and the river takes them. Eleanor leaned forward. What was the farmer's name? Elias never said. He called him only the silent witness. A chill crawled up Eleanor's spine. The same phrase on Mallory's walls. Crow looked toward the stained glass window, where moonlight bled through in red hues. The river doesn't forget, detective. It only waits. After she left the church, Eleanor's thoughts swirled. The farmer, the burial, the river, all tied together. But what if the body was still there? She contacted Bennett and arranged for a team to excavate the church basement early the next morning. But that night, she returned alone, to look for herself. The church was silent, its door unlocked. She carried only a flashlight and her gun. The floorboards creaked under her boots as she descended into the crypt below. The air grew damp, heavy. Old tombs lined the walls, their names long eroded. She swept the beam of light across the stone floor and froze. There, at the far end, was a section of wall that looked newer than the rest. The mortar was smoother, the bricks clean, and at the base of it, carved faintly into the stone, were the letters EV. Eleanor knelt and pressed her hand against the wall. A hollow echo answered. It's not just a story, she whispered. They really did bury someone here. She stood, reaching for her phone, but before she could call Bennett, a sound stopped her. A soft scrape, like something being dragged across stone. Then a whisper. Eleanor. Her blood ran cold. The voice came from behind the wall. She stepped back, flashlight trembling. The whisper came again, clearer this time, low and sorrowful. Help me, the river remembers. The light flickered. For a moment, the shadows on the wall shifted, forming the faint outline of a man's face, watching her from the other side. The air turned icy. Eleanor stumbled back, her breath misting in the air. The whisper grew louder, desperate now. Tell them. The witness still sees. Then the light went out. Total darkness. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest. She backed toward the stairs, fumbling for her phone. When the flashlight flickered back on, the wall was bare. No voice, no face, only silence. But where the carving had been, a crack now ran through the bricks, thin but deep. And from within that crack, a slow drop of red water began to seep out, glistening under the beam. Eleanor whispered, trembling, "The river's under the church." She turned to leave, but on the stone step behind her, fresh muddy footprints led upward, ones that weren't hers. And as she climbed, she realized something else. The church bell was ringing. 12 slow chimes. Midnight again. The crimson night had returned. The next morning, Ravencourt awoke to gray skies and the uneasy tolling of church bells. Detective Eleanor Graves hadn't slept. The whispers she had heard in the crypt echoed in her mind, looping endlessly. The river remembers, the witness still sees. By dawn, she was back at the church, standing outside the iron gate with Officer Bennett and 2 forensic technicians. They brought lights, shovels, and tools, ready to search beneath the stone floor. The priest, Father Crow, looked pale as he watched them prepare. "Detective," he said softly, "I beg you to reconsider. Some things buried are meant to stay that way." Eleanor met his gaze. "If what's buried here is truth, it needs to come out." With a silent nod, Crow stepped aside. The excavation began in the far corner of the crypt, where the wall had looked newer. Dust and mortar filled the air as the workers chipped carefully at the stone. Hours passed, and the rhythmic sound of chisels echoed through the church above like a beating heart. At last, one of the men called out, "Detective, we've got something." Eleanor knelt beside them. A hollow space had opened behind the wall. Inside, half buried in damp earth, lay the remains of a human skeleton. The bones were old but intact, the skull tilted slightly upward, as if it had died mid-prayer. Clutched in the bony fingers was a rusted crucifix, and around its neck hung a chain with a small brass key, identical to the one Henry Mallory had held when he died. Eleanor's breath caught. "Another key." The technician handed it to her carefully. "We'll need to date the remains," he said. "But judging by the decay, this body's been here nearly a century." Eleanor nodded, staring at the hollow sockets of the skull. "Elias Venn," she whispered. Father Crow made the sign of the cross. "So he was buried here, like he said." Eleanor turned to him sharply. "He said?" Crow hesitated. "There are stories passed among priests who came before me. They said one night, Elias came to this church claiming he had seen the truth of the Crimson Night. He begged for sanctuary. The next morning, he was gone, and the wall was sealed. Who sealed it? The mayor at the time, Samuel Pierce." Eleanor's eyes hardened. "The current mayor's grandfather." The priest nodded. She stood, the chain still in her hand. "That family's been guarding the town's secret for generations." That evening, Eleanor sat in her car outside Mayor Jonathan Pierce's mansion. The rain had returned, tapping against the windshield in a steady rhythm. The red glow of the river shimmered faintly in the distance, as though watching her. When she stepped out, a guard moved to stop her, but one look at her badge was enough. The mayor was in his study, pouring himself a drink. "Detective Graves," he said, forcing a smile. "You do have a way of turning up uninvited." "I found something beneath your church," she said flatly. "A body." The mayor froze mid-sip. "I see." His name was Elias Venn, and he was buried alive. Pierce set down his glass, his calm demeanor cracking slightly. "You can't prove that." Eleanor held up the brass key. "I can prove he was silenced, just like Henry Mallory." For a long moment, neither spoke. The storm outside grew louder, wind rattling the windows. Then the mayor sighed. "You really don't understand, do you? Ravencourt needs its silence. It's the only thing keeping the town alive." "Alive from what?" Pierce walked toward the fireplace, staring into the flames. "You think this is just about one man's death? The Crimson Night wasn't a story. It was a curse. When the town killed the witness, the river turned red and hasn't forgotten since. Every time someone tries to reveal what happened, the curse wakes again. So, you just keep killing whoever speaks?" He turned, eyes cold. Better one life than the whole town's ruin. Eleanor stepped closer, her voice sharp. That's not protection. That's murder. The mayor's expression hardened. You sound just like Elias. Before she could respond, he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small revolver. You should have left, detective. But before he could raise it, the lights flickered and went out completely. A deep rumble filled the room. The ground trembled. From outside came the faint tolling of the church bell again. Slow, hollow, wrong. Eleanor moved instinctively, grabbing a heavy book from the table and throwing it toward him. The gun went off, a deafening crack that shattered a glass cabinet. She dove behind the sofa as the mayor shouted, "You can't stop it. It's already begun again." Lightning flashed through the windows, illuminating his face, and for a second, she saw something strange. His reflection in the glass was not his own. It was older, pale, and wide-eyed. Elias Venz. The mayor screamed, dropping the gun. No, no, not you again. The lights flickered back on, and the reflection vanished. The mayor stood trembling, whispering to himself, "He's back. The witness, he's back." Eleanor rose slowly, gun aimed. "You're coming with me, Mayor." But before she could cuff him, he stumbled backward, clutching his chest. His face twisted in terror, eyes locked on the empty window. "No, please, I kept your secret." And then he fell, dead before he hit the floor. Eleanor knelt beside him. No wound, no sign of poison. His heart had simply stopped, just like Henry Mallory's. She looked toward the window. For a brief instant, the rain outside ran crimson. Later that night, the town was in chaos. News of the mayor's sudden death spread quickly, and whispers of the Crimson Curse returned to every street. Eleanor sat in her office, exhausted, the two brass keys lying on the desk before her. One from Mallory, one from Elias. Bennett entered quietly. Autopsy on the mayor came back. No toxins, no injuries. Just cardiac arrest. Fear, Eleanor murmured. The same as the others. He looked uneasy. The priest said the bell that rang last night? It hasn't worked in decades. The rope snapped years ago. Eleanor turned to him slowly. You're saying no one rang it? Bennett swallowed hard. That's exactly what I'm saying. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Eleanor picked up the two keys and turned them in her hand. Two keys, two men silenced for the same truth. Bennett frowned. What truth? That the witness wasn't just a man, it was something else. Something that doesn't die. At dawn, Eleanor returned to the church one final time. The rain had stopped, but the mist still hung low over the graveyard. The door to the crypt was open. She stepped inside, flashlight in hand. The skeleton of Elias Venz still rested in the hollow, but the chain that once held the key was gone. She froze. Footprints, fresh, wet, led away from the bones, across the floor, up the stairs. Her heart pounded as she followed them into the nave. The church was empty, the pews silent. But on the altar, a painting leaned against the wall, one she hadn't seen before. It was unfinished, but she recognized the style, Elias Venz brushwork. The scene showed the church interior, moonlight spilling across the pews. And at the center of the painting stood a lone figure, Eleanor herself, holding a flashlight. At the bottom, wet crimson paint still glistened where the signature had just been written. Witness, 2025. Eleanor stepped back, breath trembling. No, she whispered. No, not me. But even as she turned toward the door, the church bell began to ring again. Low, solemn, endless. She looked toward the river through the stained glass, and for the first time, she saw it clearly. Beneath the red surface, faces, hundreds of them, drifting, watching, whispering. And one voice rose above the rest. Tell them, Eleanor. The crimson night never ends. The dawn came late to Ravencourt. A mist rolled in from the river, dulling every sound, swallowing every color, until even the crimson of the water seemed pale and uncertain. Detective Eleanor Graves stood outside the burned ruins of the old chapel, her coat still damp from the rain, her mind caught between the fragments of what she had learned, and what still refused to make sense. Behind her, Officer Lang trudged through the mud, carrying a charred notebook. "Found this under the floorboards," he said. "Must have belonged to Mallory." Eleanor took it gently. The cover was cracked, the edges burned, but the last few pages were still legible. She turned them carefully, her eyes following the words written in Mallory's frantic hand. "The witness must see. The truth must be told. They cannot silence the river forever." Her breath caught when she reached the final line. "When the night turns crimson, the town's sins will rise again, through the eyes of the living." She closed the book slowly. "He knew," she murmured. "He was trying to warn us." Lang frowned. "About what?" "Some ghost story." Eleanor turned toward the river. "About a cover-up. A massacre that happened 100 years ago, the first Crimson Night. The town elders killed those who tried to expose them. They called it a sickness, but it wasn't. It was revenge." Lang's eyes widened. "You're saying Mallory found proof?"
Yes.
"And someone else knew he did." She looked toward the ruined church where the old painting had burned to ash. "The same family that's been running this town for generations." Lang hesitated. "The Hargraves?" Eleanor nodded grimly. "Mayor Hargrave's great-grandfather was the one who started it all. Mallory traced the records back to him. And when the mayor learned Mallory had the evidence, he tried to get it back. But the mayor's dead now," Lang said quietly. Eleanor turned toward him, her face unreadable. "Is he?" Lang froze. "You think he—" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she knelt by the grass near the chapel wall. There, half buried in the mud, lay something small and glinting, a key, identical to the one Mallory had clutched when he died. She picked it up. "He had a duplicate," she whispered. "There's another lock somewhere." Lang stepped closer. "But where?" Eleanor glanced at the river again, her eyes narrowing. "Underneath." By noon, they had gathered ropes and lanterns and made their way to the Ravencourt tunnels, the old smuggling routes that ran beneath the town, long abandoned and sealed by the council decades ago. The entrance was hidden behind ivy and broken stone near the riverbank. Eleanor inserted the key into a rusted lockplate buried under the roots. It clicked softly, and the door gave way with a groan. A foul, cold air seeped out. "After you," she said to Lang, managing a faint, grim smile. They descended into the dark. The tunnels twisted like veins beneath the earth, damp and echoing with distant drips. Every step they took stirred dust from another century. At last, they reached a chamber, a wide, circular room lit faintly by their lanterns. On the walls were faded murals, painted in red and black. They showed scenes of fire, death, and figures kneeling by a blood-colored river. Lang shuddered. "What is this place?" Eleanor raised her lantern higher. "A confession," she said. In the center of the room stood a stone altar. On it rested a box, carved with strange symbols. She touched it, hesitated, then opened it. Inside lay stacks of old papers, birth records, letters, and photographs. One in particular made her stop. It showed a group of men standing near the river, holding torches. Among them was a younger version of the mayor's great-grandfather. Beneath it, scrawled in ink, were the words, "The witness must not speak." Lang leaned closer. "This is it. The proof." But before Eleanor could respond, a sound echoed through the tunnel. Footsteps, slow and deliberate. She drew her gun. "Who's there?" No answer. Only the echo of movement coming closer. Then a figure emerged from the shadows, a man in a long, dark coat. His face pale, his eyes sunken but burning with something like grief. It was Mayor Hargrave. "Put the gun down, detective," he said quietly. "It's over." Eleanor didn't lower it. "You're supposed to be dead." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I am. Maybe we all are, in this cursed town." Lang stepped forward. "You killed Mallory. And your family before you killed the others. You buried the truth under this place." Hargrave's eyes flickered. "My family did what they thought was necessary. Ravencourt was built on their silence. And Mallory, he wanted to destroy it all." Eleanor's voice was sharp. He wanted the truth told. The mayor's hand trembled. Truth doesn't bring peace, detective. It only brings more blood. Eleanor took a step closer. Then why are you here? He looked at the box. To end it. Once and for all. Before either of them could move, Hargraves struck a match and tossed it onto the old altar. The flames leapt up, hungry and fast. Lang shouted, trying to douse it, but the fire spread, devouring the papers, the photographs, the truth. Eleanor lunged forward, but Hargraves stood still, eyes closed, whispering something she couldn't hear. The firelight turned his face crimson, like the river outside. And then the ceiling groaned. The old stone began to collapse.
Go!
Eleanor shouted to Lang. They ran, the tunnel shaking behind them. The last thing she saw before the chamber fell in was Hargraves' silhouette standing calmly in the fire, his voice echoing faintly through the smoke. Let the river wash it clean. Hours later, Eleanor stood by the riverbank. The fire had burned out beneath the earth, and the mist was lifting. The townspeople were gathering, whispering about the smoke rising from the ground, about the strange red gleam in the water. Lang came up beside her. All that proof gone. Not all, she said, pulling from her pocket the single photograph she'd managed to save from the flames. The one marked the witness, must not speak. Lang looked at her. What now? Eleanor gazed out over the river. We speak. That's what the witness wanted. To make sure it's never buried again. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint toll of the church bell. The sun broke through the clouds, and for a brief, strange moment, the river no longer looked crimson but clear, like it was finally clean. Eleanor tucked the photograph into her coat. The truth, she whispered, has been watching us all along. And as she walked away from the river, a ripple moved across its surface, as if something unseen beneath had stirred. Somewhere deep in the water, a reflection shimmered, a shadow of a man watching her go, silent and still. The last silent witness of the Crimson Night.